Hello team, today we're reviewing a unique window into the cyberpunk architecture with Transistor. Developed by Supergiant Games, known for their wildly popular game Bastion, Transistor puts you in the shoes of a famous diva known only as Red. Waking up next to a dead body, a USB sword, and no voice, Red must take the Transistor in hand in order to find answers about what happened during the night of her failed assassination and the events that play out around them. As Red and the Transistor make their way across the city, however, beings known as the Process start showing up and work against Red's campaign for the truth. With the power of the Transistor, however, Red stands a fighting chance against these malign machinations and gives her the edge in fighting back. Transistor handles gameplay in an interesting manner. The main game is presented in an isometric view very similar to Bastion. Red navigates the area and interacts with the environment in order to gain insight on what's happening in town and progress the story at hand. Menus are only accessible through a save point system that handles both saving, journal logs, and skill management. Combat involves fighting in a designated zone against various processes using either live-action combat or the much-touted planning mode, which lets you plan out a certain amount of attacks to occur all at once. Character progression is marked by combat instances alongside certain plot events that strengthen the power of the Transistor. Alongside the main story, the game has a pack of challenge missions to give a bit of an infusion to character levels for more strengthened skills as well. While the gameplay isn't innovative or groundbreaking, it certainly does handle things in a very enabling and rewarding way. Skills are probably the coolest thing about this game. Each skill that a player acquires in this game can be used as an actual skill, an augment for another skill, or a passive ability for Red. With access to 4 available skills, 2 augment slots per skill, and 4 passive slots, the number of skill combinations and results is head-crushing. The beauty of this, however, is that no skill combination is ever trite. Each skill trait is useful in a certain way, and players will find themselves actively trying out new combinations just to see how it all works. As an added bonus, players get extra backstory on the game if a skill is used in different circumstances, which is more icing on the cake. Actual combat plays out in an interesting pace. Each fight can be played out through either live-action combat or by using the planning mode mechanic. If players just go raw into combat, they could spam moves with impunity, but have a hard time managing enemy mobs and attacks. Should a player use planning mode, they can set up a chain of skills to combo instantly for a huge damage spike but have a cooldown period of being unable to attack. The trade-offs are prevalent in combat, and oftentimes you'll see why both models of gameplay exist and how they balance out each mode very well. There's a huge risk-reward system when operating in both modes, and in turn it makes the game feel really exciting in the process. The game also doesn't overly hold your hand either. The player is just dropped into the game and trickled information on how to play, and the game ever so slightly provokes experimentation with skills as well. It's all very refreshing and fun to play when the player can toy around with skills as he likes. There are some slight gripes I have with the gameplay, however. My main problem is that while combat is really interesting, the enemy variety is somewhat lacking. There are roughly 8 common enemies total, and while enemies level up in a sense and get new skills, they still act roughly the same as their low-level counterparts. The game's combat system also feels ever so slightly clunky in one regard. Certain skills in the game facilitate defensive dodges and buffs, but hot swapping between skills feels a bit awkward in that sense, so it's harder to do reflex-based dodges without going into planning mode. Finally, in a bit of a weird mix of gameplay and story, bits of the story are locked behind skills and inhibitors, however most of the skills and inhibitors are acquired by leveling up. This results in needing to either do every challenge mission or running multiple new game pluses in order to get the extra trivia, which feels like unnecessary grind in the long run. These flaws aren't anything game-breaking at all, but it feels like some extra polish that could have been addressed. While Transistor's gameplay was somewhat run-of-the-mill, the game's design direction was incredible. The thing that put Bastion and Supergiant in the spotlight was how they presented their game, and Transistor is certainly a worthy successor in that regard. The game is presented in a gorgeous isometric view, and while the game itself is technically a 3D game, it all looks like a painting in motion. Cutscenes are kinda weak, being concept art just shifted around, but the art direction is so well done that I could forgive that somewhat. The design direction for certain characters and factions are all very well done and provides a neat dichotomy in terms of visual as well. The primary design direction of slight cyberpunk meets heavy Victorian influences felt really cool and gave me vibes of the book The Diamond Age. And the later advent of sterile tech aesthetic with non-Euclidean space was such a cool shift in direction as well. The music for Transistor was such a great album that set my heart ablaze. Darren Core was really on top of his game with this soundtrack. A neat little touch with the game as well is a hum button that lets the main character sing alongside the soundtrack, which gives the game and the soundtrack more charm. However, the writing in this game is a bit hit or miss. The game keeps you guessing in all the right ways and conveys certain plot elements in a clever fashion, but there are parts of the game where you can clearly tell where the budget ran out. It's easy to see that they had to cut out segments of the game roughly halfway through, and that just kills the pacing of the story overall when you suddenly jump in between plot segments in a flash. Despite the writing being poorly managed, Transistor proves that Supergiant is certainly building up a reputation of visually amazing games with great soundtracks. The game engine for Transistor is a mixed bag of issues. First off, there's no opening menu or title screen, you just boot the game, press start, and start playing. I really can't call this a completely bad thing since you hit the ground running, and that felt really good, but it felt a tad jarring since I thought I missed the intro. The game roughly uses 40% CPU usage and a whopping 1 GB of memory, which is kinda shocking compared to how well optimized Bastion was. The game also doesn't play well with recording software. I couldn't get DxTory to hook onto this game while OBS was able to record but struggled to keep the animation smooth. The options menu for the game is pretty bare, only offering resolution options in full screen, but no VSync to remedy the screen tearing I would occasionally get. There's controller support alongside keyboard mouse controls, and you can customize the controls, however controller support seems flaky at the moment for anything that's not a 360 controller, which is rather unfortunate. Finally, while this is a niche problem, the game's max resolution is 1080p, so any monitors with a higher resolution will have to deal with upscaling. The engine's a bit of a mess, but if you want to just play the game by itself, then it's fine enough to work with. Transistor's such an unusual game. Despite some of its glaring flaws, it was also one of the most refreshing games I played this year with its alluring story and adventurous gameplay mechanics. I'm honestly hard-pressed to recommend this game considering its length versus the $20 price tag, but I will say if you enjoyed Bastion, then you will most certainly enjoy Transistor. While it didn't change much, the game was still a breath of fresh air in this dystopian gaming market.